All right, so in this section, we'll be taking a look at old art because understanding the history of art is the important key to appreciating modern art. We will look at some key points throughout Western art history that led us to this point where concept takes over for craftsmanship. That helps us to explain why the Mark Rothko painting and the Willem de Kooning painting are so appreciated. It's because of the idea behind them and not so much the way they were made. Whereas with old art, craftsmanship, the way things were made, was sort of the superior feature of art. So we're going to see sort of where and how that transition happens. So first we need to take a look at what were the rules. Before modern art, so before the 1860s, we're going to call all of that art classical art. And in general, ever since ancient Greek times, there were two basic sort of unwritten rules that art followed. And for number 8, we're going to call the first rule the subject rule. The subject of art is the stuff that the art is representing. So the subject here, and the sculpture on the right, is the Greek goddess Aphrodite. Classical art, starting with ancient Greece, mandated that artists could only depict certain subjects. And the first subject they were allowed to depict were things that were religious. So, again, the Venus de Milo here, Aphrodite actually, she fits the religious theme because she is a Greek goddess. Artists were also allowed to depict things that were historical, especially things that were historically important. And it's important here to note that everything to us seems like it's historical just because it looks old. But you have to put yourself in the mind of the person who is making the art. Was it historically important for them? So if they're showing an emperor who's riding into battle, that is something that would be historically important. And the third subject that artists could only make has to do with the elite. The elite figures of society are people who have money and power and fame. So think about monarchs like kings and queens, certain political figures like the Medici banking family of the Renaissance. Those are figures who are considered elite. So in general, up until the 1860s, these are the subjects that art showed. There's a second rule that was also really important. This is number 9, and we're going to call it the craftsmanship rule. And the craftsmanship rule states that classical art also had to be painted or sculpted with absolute perfection and realism. If you look again at the Venus de Milo here, she is perfect and realistic. And it's especially impressive that this artist was able to take a really dense rock, like marble, and turn it into something that appears to be really soft, like human flesh and flowing drapery. That takes a lot of skill to make something that looks that perfect and realistic, especially out of marble. Interesting little fact about the Venus de Milo. She's one of the world's most famous sculptures. And you might be thinking, well, she's really failed the craftsmanship rule. She doesn't even have arms. However, she used to have arms. They're just lost. She's actually made up of over 200 different pieces. And she was found on the Greek island of Milos in the Aegean Sea. And somewhere in transportation, her arms just got lost. So try not to hold it against the artist for the fact that she doesn't currently have arms. She would have had arms once upon a time. For kicks and giggles, I wanted to show you this advertisement really quick. Oh, I thought it was so funny when that commercial came out, so I had to share that with you. Okay. So basically we have our two rules. if you have rules in a society, you generally have people who enforce the rules. Sort of like we have laws, and then we have law enforcement officers, police officers, who make sure that we follow those laws. So if the art world is going to have these sort of rules, who is it that enforces them? We're going to focus on one group of people. They're known as the French Académie d'Art, and they are sort of not just a school where people would learn, but it's sort of a community of scholars and historians and critics who really set the tone in the art world for what is acceptable. And this Academy of Art hasn't been around forever. They were actually only important during the 1600s to about the 1900s. Around the 1600s, a whole bunch of European countries were sort of establishing their own academies of art. The French one was just sort of the most revered and the most respected. Paris, because that's where the French Academy of Art was the capital of the art world. And it's not like somebody just like planted a flag down there and was like, ha, this is the capital of the art world. It was just sort of known throughout the art community that Paris was where you wanted to go if you wanted to be a really famous artist. Sort of like today, if you want to be a really famous actor or actress on the screen, then you have to go to Los Angeles, because Los Angeles is sort of like the capital of the cinema world. But Paris, up until the 1900s, was revered as the capital of the art world. Interesting little tidbit, though. Today, New York is sort of considered the capital of the art world. London is a sort of a close second, and actually currently they're very much in competition with one another. But New York is sort of the capital of the modern art world because of a lot of things that happened in American art in the 1950s. All right, so the last little note I have for you here is number 13, which is on the back of your paper. And a salon is the name of an organized official exhibit. So the French Academy of Art would put on these annual exhibits called salons, which sounds like the place where you get your hair done, but it's different. And at these annual salons, artists were invited to show their work. And if you were invited to show your work, that really meant that you had made it as an artist. It's sort of the equivalent of being invited to show your fashion designs at Fashion Week if you're a fashion designer. The annual exhibits, the salons, looked sort of like this. They were very crowded, not just with people, but if you look at the walls, they're incredibly crowded with artwork. There's hardly any space between each of those frames. But if you take a look at the way that people are dressed, you have sort of the very well-off people here. There's not a whole lot of common folk. So it was very much a prestigious thing to not only show your artwork here, but also to be invited as a guest to look at the artwork there.